My dear ثانوية عامة students, welcome once more to your English program. بجد أنا عارف إن إحنا قربنا، الخوف بدأ يزيد، إحنا معاكم أهو في Great Expectations وإن شاء الله هنلخصها لكم كلها. هبتدي chapter 3 بفكرة الأسئلة، عشان الأسئلة هي اللي هتجيب القصة معانا. لما ضربنا عصفورين بحجرة، أوكي؟ What did the man in the inn give Pip؟ فاكرين؟ They were sitting in the inn together and the man gave Pip a coin wrapped in a pound note. A coin wrapped in a pound note. خلي بالكم كلمة wrapped في W قبليها، ما بتاخدوش بالكم منها، ما بتتنطقش، لكن هي wrapped بتبقى WRAPPED. Okay? طيب. What did Miss Havisham do with Joe? What did she ask him to do? First طبعا وانا بحكي لكم كده she asked him to play with Estelle. وايه اللي كان بيحصل when Pip was playing with Estelle؟ كانت بتذله طول الوقت، تحسسه that he was less than her. خلته يكره عمره، يكره حياته because he was just working with Joe. الحقيقة it was very cruel of Estelle, but Miss Havisham was trying to take revenge. كانت بتحاول تاخد بطارها من كل الرجالة في العالم. فالسؤال what did Miss Havisham do with Joe? What did she ask him to do? في الآخر الحقيقة she gave him a large sum of money to pay for Pip during the apprenticeship period. الحقيقة Miss Havisham let Pip play with Estelle several times, and all the time Estelle was making fun of poor Pip. But in the end, she asked him what he wanted to be, and he said, I wanted to be an apprentice to Joe. So she gave the sum of money and told him not to come back again. Not to come back again. However, in his second visit, Miss Havisham, what did she tell him? Actually, she told him of the story of her marriage. Poor Miss Havisham. She was all dressed in her wedding dress. كانت لابسة فستان الفرح والتورتة موجودة. That's what you remember. فاكرين لما قلت لكم الساعة كلها وقفت الساعة كام؟ قولوا لي وقفت على الساعة كام؟ 9 إلا تلت. كان ميعاد الفرح والعريس ما جاش. And her whole life stopped at that moment. She didn't remove her dress. التورتة بقت كلها عنكبوت، cobwebs، لكن فضلت زي ما هي. Miss Havisham lived in the past. Okay? Who were in Miss Havisham's house and why? She had guests. They were members of her family. They came to wish her a happy birthday. لو أنا قلت لكم إنه Estelle treated Pip like a pet, how do we prove that? فاكرين؟ Actually, she put food for him in the dog's plate outside the house. كانت هي قاعدة تاكل على السفرة وتحط له الأكل في الطبق بتاع الكلب عشان ياكل فيه. She was very mean. She was trying to make him feel poor and low and not to her standard. والحقيقة الموضوع ده أثر في بيب جدا جدا جدا، إنه خلاه يزعل إنه هيبقى مع جو بيشتغل as an apprentice. يعني حتى بدأ يتضايق من جو اللي هو كان جو بيدافع عنه من أخته نفسها. Remember, Pip's sister was very cruel to him, and who defended him? It was Joe who came between him and his sister. اللي في بعض الأحيان السيستر كانت بتضرب جوزها نفسه because she was that cruel. Okay? Who did Pip see outside the house? فاكرين؟ He met someone outside the house, a young man, and they had a fight together. What did Mrs. Joe and Mr. Pumblechook think about Miss Havisham? طبعا كانت فرحانة قوي أخته إنه Miss Havisham الست الغنية, the rich woman, was helping him out. Okay? And they thought she was going to help him with a lot of money. They thought she was going to help him. She was going to give Pip her fortune. هنعرف في الرواية طبعا إنه ده ما حصلش. Okay? Why did Pip change his desire to be a blacksmith? Why? Because he felt so low what Estelle did to him that he wanted to be a gentleman. He wanted to be a gentleman. He wanted to be educated. He made Biddy, who came in. انتوا عارفين مرة Pip was coming back home and he found a lot of people around the house. He rushed in, found his sister lying on the floor with blood coming down from her head. A stranger had come into the house and hit her on the head. The cruel woman recovered. She became a very quiet person. She could hardly speak again. And so Biddy came to help in the house. الشيء اللي بيحزن وبيفرح في نفس الوقت إنه اللي حصل إنه جوزها جو الراجل الطيب وبيب بدأوا يجدوا إنه الحياة بقت مرتاحة، ما هي بقت quiet woman مشلولة وقاعدة ساكتة. وبيدي حولت البيت إلى جنة. She turned their house into paradise and she became the best cook ever. My dear ثانوية عامة friends, welcome once more to your English program. طبعا احنا مع Great Expectations. فاكرين المرة اللي فاتت we said that Pip's sister was hit on the head and she was lying on the ground when Pip walked in. وشفنا شخصيات تانيين دخلت معانا. شفنا بيدي who came to help after his sister was hit. وفي شخصية أورليك the bad person اللي بنشك اللي هو كان الكونفكت التاني اللي احتمال يكون هو اللي ضرب مس هافيشام. خليكم معانا كده وبالأسئلة مع بعض هنشوف هيحصل ايه. Why were people gathering in the kitchen of Mr. Joe's house? Many people were there. قلنا ايه فاكرين؟ لسه قايلها لكم. دخل بيب لقى اخته مرميه على الارض. Because Mrs. Joe had an accident and someone had hit her severely on the head. وزي ما قلت لكم فقدت النطق، بقت تتكلم بصعوبة جدا وبقت شخصية هادية جدا after she had been a very severe woman. Who did Pip and Mr. Wopsy meet on their way home? Who did Pip meet? They met Orlick, who was acting strangely and told them about the prisoners who escaped from a ship prison. This makes you think more about Orlick. Who is this Orlick? Who is Orlick? Who helped Mrs. Joe after the accident? Who helped Mrs. Joe after the accident? But she didn't help Mrs. Joe alone. She helped Joe himself and Pip. Yes, it was the beautiful girl, Biddy. Biddy was helping them in the house and she was cooking. And they said that her cooking was yummy. How often did Pip visit Miss Havisham? After Miss Havisham had given Pip the money to be an apprentice, he visited her once a year. He used to go and visit her once a year. وكل مرة بيلاقي الساعة واقفة عند 20 to 9. Where did Pip see Mr. Jaggers first? Actually, he saw him at Miss Havisham's house and then he saw him at the inn. فاكرين? He saw him at the inn. What did Mr. Jaggers tell Joe and Pip? This is very important. He told them that there was someone who refused to be mentioned and he wanted to help Pip to have a better future and to be a gentleman. كأن حلم بيب اتحقق. فاكرين استيل كانت بتكسره ازاي؟ Now he wanted to be a gentleman and there was someone who was going to help him to be a gentleman. Who did Pip think this person was? Who did Pip think was his secret benefactor? طبعا الكل فاكر Miss Havisham because she gave him the sum of money, because she invited him to the house. But we will find out differently. What did Mr. Jaggers give Pip and why? He gave him something. He gave him money to buy new clothes. عشان يبقى gentleman قال يعني فلازم طبعا اللبس المناسب. فhe gave him money to buy new clothes. What was Mr. Jaggers' offer to Joe? He offered to give him a big amount of money if Pip completed his education in London, far away, and returned home. Where would Pip have his education? In London, in Mr. Matthew Pocket's home. Now we will move to some critical questions. Critical questions يعني ايه؟ شغلوا مخكم ده كويس معايا، اوكي؟ شغلوا مخكم كويس. If I was to tell you Orlick was an intelligent criminal, prove it. هتردوا تقولوا ايه؟ Because no one discovered it was he who attacked Mrs. Joe. لعب لعبته وهرب بيها. Miss Havisham asked Pip to visit her on her birthday. What does it show about her character? It's very strange. It's a very strange relationship between Miss Havisham and Pip. She acted strangely with Pip, but she loved him. كانت بتذله عن طريق استيل لكن كان عندها affection towards him. If I were to tell you Biddy was a kind person, discuss. طبعا احنا لسه قايلين انه بيدي was very gentle مع مسز جو وهي عيانه وكانت كويسه مع نفس جو وكانت بتدرس بيب نفسه. فطبعا هنقول she helped Pip in his education and also kept helping Mrs. Joe after losing her ability to talk or move. And she was kind to Joe himself. Okay? Do you think that Pip was happy after his sister was hurt? Why? أنا قلت لكم الكلام ده في الشابتر اللي فاتت، سبقت بالموضوع. No, because he stated that he loved her despite her cruel treatment with him. When asked directly, Pip has a very kind heart. بالرغم إنه المال هتغيره شوية، لكن هيرجع لعقله تاني في الآخر. He said no that he loved his sister very much لأنها أخته. Even if she was cruel to him, هي أخته، فhe loved her. لكن we all know من الواقع that his life became easier after his sister was hit. Do you think that Joe was happy about Mr. Jaggers' offer? طبعا لا. جو بيحب بيب قوي وكان زعلان جدا انه هيسافر ويسيبه والابرنتس مش هيبقى عنده. فهي was not happy. He was not happy. He refused it, but he had to give it. Which one had better morals, Joe or Pip, and why? الحقيقة ده سؤال صعب قوي. مين فيهم كان عنده أخلاق أكتر، جو ولا بيب؟ أسيبكم تردوا على السؤال ده ولا أرد لكم عليه؟ I think Joe was a better human being. Joe was a very kind man. Joe took care of Pip and would never leave Pip. طبعا انتوا ممكن تردوا وتقولوا Pip was not very good because he left his family and friends to better himself. لكن حرام برضو استيل كانت جرحته قوي، فهو كان عايز يثبت نفسه. فهي left not because he was bad but because he wanted to become a gentleman. My dear ثانوية عامة friends, welcome once more to your English program. طبعا أنا عارف إن كل ما الشابترز بنزود فيها بنقرب أكتر على الامتحانات، ونفسي كده كلكم تهدوا نفسكم جدا جدا جدا. مفيش حاجة أحسن من الهدوء وأنت بتذاكر، وزي ما بقول لكم دايما whatever you read, whatever you listen, do it several times before you sleep, and when you wake up in bed, think. شغلوا مخكم. Try and think about everything you read. هتلاقي نفسك you captured 70%. لو عدتها تاني في اللحظة دي والله ما هتروح من مخك، وهتلاقي نفسك كله ثبت هنا. So please don't worry. Now we will be doing the next chapter and we are going to go through some of the questions first. Why did Pip visit Miss Havisham before leaving to London? تفتكروا ليه بيب راح يزور Miss Havisham before leaving؟ طبعا he had gone downtown, he bought all the clothes, he was so excited, he was going to better himself, he was going for a better education. طبعا he went to visit her because really Pip thought that Miss Havisham was his benefactor, that she was the secret benefactor who gave him the money. Okay? How long did Pip's trip to London take? How long did Pip's trip to London take? Came 5 hours. It took 5 hours. Why was Pip surprised when he saw Mr. Matthew Pocket's son? فاكرين ليه؟ أتاري Mr. Matthew Pocket ده ابنه هو اللي كان يتخانق معاه. He had a fight with him because he discovered that he was the pale boy he saw in the garden of Miss Havisham's house, and they had a fight together. Remember? What did Mr. Wemmick give Pip? He gave him a big amount of money. He gave him a big amount of money. Who told Pip about Miss Havisham's story? مين اللي حكى لبيب كل قصة Miss Havisham? Herbert Pocket. Why did Miss Havisham ask Matthew Pocket not to visit her again? Because she thought that he wanted to take her money when he advised her not to trust her fiancé. She thought he wanted to take her money when he advised her not to trust her fiancé. طبعا to know the story of Miss Havisham and her fiancé. Poor Miss Havisham had a brother and they both had inherited a lot of money. بس اللي حصل انه اخوها خلص فلوسه وابتدى يهجم على فلوسها. مش بس كده، هو اللي دبر لها الخطوبة. شوفوا حصل ايه في الفرح بتاعها. What did Pip notice in Mr. Wemmick's hand? He noticed that Mr. Wemmick was wearing a ring which he had taken as a present from some people he worked with. Okay? What was different about Mr. Wemmick's house? It looked like a small castle. على فكرة أنا شخصياً كنت طول عمري بحلم بالwooden house، مش هقول castle. في تحقيق الأحلام ربنا حقق لي الحلم ده. عندي wooden cottage كده. It's a lovely wooden cottage. I'd invite you all to come and we spend a great day there together. Okay. What did Mr. Wemmick tell Pip about Mr. Jagger? What did Mr. Wemmick tell Pip about Mr. Jagger? He told him that everyone feared Mr. Jaggers, even the criminals. كانوا بيخافوا من Mr. Jaggers. He didn't even lock the door of his house because no one dared to rob it. Dared يعني محدش يستجرأ إنه يسرقه. ما كانش بيقفل بابه. Who was Pip's teacher in London? صح؟ Mr. Matthew Pocket. لو دخلنا مع بعض شوية في critical questions بقى. ندخل في critical questions. I felt though the whole world was waiting for me. انتوا تخيلوا كده بيب أحلامه بتتحقق. انت لو سافرت بلد تانية you will think the whole world was opening for you. This quote was said by Pip while he was traveling to London. It reflects that he was happy and he was ambitious. Ambitious. يعني ايه ambitious؟ حد فيكم يرد عليا. يعني ايه ambitious؟ عنده طموح. It's very good to be ambitious, but never let your ambition get the better of you. دايما اوزن امورك. دايما اوزن امورك. Miss Havisham decided to adopt Estelle instead of Mr. Matthew Pocket's son. Discuss. ليه Miss Havisham wanted to adopt Estelle ومش الson? Because she wanted to use her. كانت بتستخدمها to take revenge on men. فاكرين? Used to put Pip down, make him feel less than her. If you were Miss Havisham, would you have listened to Mr. Matthew's advice? لو انتوا كنتوا مكان Miss Havisham كنتوا هتسمعوا كلمة Mr. Matthew. الرد is yes, because he was her cousin and surely he would take care of her fortune. ده اللي كلنا بنأمله. بيتهيأ لنا انه القرايب لازم يحافظوا على بعض، لكن شفنا اخوها عمل فيها ايه. Mr. Jaggers did not even lock his house at night. What does this reflect about his character? It reflects that he is very strong, he is quite famous in the neighborhood, and nobody dares to approach his house. فاكرين قلنا nobody could rob him. He left his door open. Okay? Do you think that Mr. Matthew was still angry with Miss Havisham? إنها ما سمعتش كلامه؟ لا، الحقيقة الراجل كان طيب. And he was not angry. بتصعب عليه because he used to go and visit her. My dear ثانوية عامة friends, welcome once more to your English program. أهلا بيكم. النهاردة هندخل على chapter 6. يا رب تكونوا متابعين معانا واحدة واحدة. We are trying very hard to make it as easy for you as possible. Let's look at some of the questions for chapter 6. أول حاجة, why did Pip dislike Drummond? تفتكروا ليه؟ تعرفوا إيه عن Drummond؟ Drummond is from aristocracy. He thinks too much of himself. He is conceited. Conceited يعني إيه؟ أسمع كل واحد فيكم يقول مغرور. مغرور. Conceited. He didn't like him because وهم قاعدين على السفرة بياكلوا. He didn't stop talking about himself and his achievements. And he always wanted to appear better than Pip and Startup. كان عايز دايما يبين إنه هو مفيش حد زيه أبدا. What did Mr. Jaggers ask Molly to do? فاكرين مولي هي كانت الهاوس كيبر and she had cooked the meal. بس اللي حط الأكل كان مين؟ كان الراجل نفسه اللي هو مستر جاجر نفسه. ليه؟ because he was a miser. ما كانش عايز كل واحد يغلي في الأكل اللي هو عايزه زي ما هو عايز. لا، هو كان بيخلي باله وكان بيحط لكل واحد على قده. لكن he asked Molly to show her wrists. To show her wrists. وكان فيهم إيه؟ a lot of scars. A lot of scars. الحقيقة بعد كده why did Molly look worried؟ غلبانة الهاوس كيبر قاعدة وخايفة. خايفة ليه؟ She was afraid that Mr. Jaggers would criticize the food. إنه هيقول لها الأكل ده ما طلعش حلو. إيه الطبيخ اللي أنت عملتيه ده؟ كانت قاعدة خايفة. So she was scared. Why did Biddy send a letter to Pip؟ You remember Biddy؟ افتكرها تاني كده مع بعض. مين بيدي؟ فاكرين لما جو's wife بيب's sister لقوها مرمية على الأرض والدم نازل منها وعاشت بس ما رجعش الكلام أبدا تاني وهديت وبقت إنسانة بعد ما كانت very cruel person بقت إنسانة هادية غلبانة في سكينة. مين اللي جت تساعد؟ كانت بيدي. وبيدي عملت إيه؟ She took care of Pip's sister, she took care of Joe himself, and she took care of Pip. وأهم حاجة كانت بتأكلهم الأكل الطعم قوي. هو ده اللي كانت بيدي دايما بتعمله. Why did she send a letter to Pip؟ الحقيقة هي بعتت له جواب. She sent him a letter to tell him that Joe would travel to London to see him. إنه جو هيجي لندن يقابله. لا تتخيلوا بيب طلع قليل الأصل إزاي واتضايق إزاي من فكرة زيارة جوز أخته ليه لأن كان خجلان منه. Why didn't Pip want Joe to come to London؟ أنا لسه مجاوب عليها. للأسف he was ashamed of him. He was ashamed of the way he dressed, of his coarse hands. He was just ashamed of him. What did Joe tell Pip when he visited him in London? What did Joe tell Pip when he visited him in London? Visited يعني إيه؟ احفظوا الكلمة دي. زاره. When he visited him in London, he told him that Miss Havisham wanted to see him. Miss Havisham كانت عايزة تشوفه. He told him another piece of information. Stella had come back. Okay? قال له حاجتين مهمين جدا. Why did Joe feel uncomfortable when he met Pip and Herbert? Poor Joe. He was sitting with Pip who made him feel uncomfortable. يعني because he thought Pip didn't want his friends to see him. كان مكسوف منه. He looked poor. He was poorly dressed. All these things affected poor Joe very much. وهتشوفوا في نهاية الرواية الدنيا كلها يا جماعة فعلا داين تدان. لما بيب ده هيتغر وهيفتكر الفلوس كل حاجة وهيفتكر انه مس هافشام هي اللي كانت عاملة له البنفاكتور وهيلاقي انه بالعكس انه الراجل الكونفكت هو اللي عمل له الفلوس دي كلها ويتضح في الاخر من ولائه هيحاول يرد الجميل للراجل انه يرجع يهربه تاني لان الراجل كان قاعد في استراليا وبيبعت له الفلوس من هناك. الدنيا داين تدان فبيضطر بيب يبيع كل حاجة عشان يحاول ينقذ الراجل ده ويرجعه تاني. في الوقت ده هيكون تروح منه كل حاجة هتلاقي بس اللي واقف جنبه يحط له الكمانات على راسه وقاعد يعمل له نيرسينج لمدة أشهر هو جو جوز أخته تاني. شوفوا الزمن يعني هو دار عليه الزمن ولقى الصديق الوفي هو زوج الأخت للآخر. Where did Pip stay after he returned home? He chose to book a hotel. فضل يقعد في هوتيل عن ما يروح يقعد عند بيب. Why was Pip unable to sleep that night? فاكرين هتلاقوا while Pip was on the coach she heard two people talking وقالوا إنه في escaped convict. خلاه بقى terrified. He couldn't sleep all night thinking about what might happen. دلوقتي هاخدكم برضو زي كل مرة على شوية تشغيل مخي كده مع بعض. شوية critical thinking. Do you think that Mr. Jaggers liked Drummond? Why and why not? Do you think that Mr. Jaggers liked Drummond? فاكرين Drummond؟ المغرور يعني ايه؟ conceit. No, he did not. Because he advised Pip to keep away from him. قال له خليك بعيد عنه. Mr. Jaggers kept all the food at his side and preferred to serve them himself. What does this reflect about his character? أنا لسه قايل لكم البخل. He was a miser. He wanted to give them just enough for everybody. Pip talked in a different way during the dinner. Discuss. طبعا كانت مباراة درامر عمال يقول أنا شاطر التاني عايز يقول له أنا أشطر أنا شاطر أنا أشطر كل واحد فيهم بيحاول يبين نفسه على التاني وده بيحصل على فكرة من الأصحاب بيقعدوا مع بعض حتى على القهاوي كده كل واحد يعمل نفسه فتك أكتر من التاني بتحصل بين الشباب من وقت لآخر this is what happened. The conversation turned into a competition. أصبحت مسابقة بينهم between the three men who were sitting. Each one was telling about his achievements like Drummond. لو أنا قلت لكم مثلا Pip treated Joe in a bad way. Discuss. هتقولوا إيه؟ طبعا reflect على كل اللي فات. He preferred to meet him in the lodgings في حتة برا. Not to be seen by his friends because he was ashamed of him. للأسف. Molly looked a different woman. Proof. احنا عارفين she was a 40-year-old woman but her wrists looked very strong and she had remarkable scars on her wrists. My dear ثانوية عامة friends, welcome once more to your English program. النهاردة we're going to do chapter 7. We will be answering the questions. The first question is, why did Pip get surprised when he arrived at Miss Havisham's house? Chef Orlick, فاكرين? He found out that Orlick was the gatekeeper of the house. كويس؟ طيب. How did Estella affect Pip's behavior towards Joe? Here I have to explain something. We know that Pip was getting ashamed of Joe, especially when he came to visit him in London. لما جه زاره وغلبان جو واقف بالبورنيكا بتاعته خجلان وبيب خلاه يحس قد ايه هو فقير بالنسبة ليه. This was also a lot of Estella's doing. She was the one who pushed him. She told him you shouldn't know anybody from the village. You shouldn't. مش لازم تعرف أي حد من القرى دول. أنت النهارده بقيت city person. بقيت Londoner. مالكش دعوة بالناس اللي جايين من القرى. Who did Pip tell about his love for Estella? حكى لمين؟ طبعا we know مين بقى أعز صديق ليه في لندن؟ قولوا لي عايز أسمع. Herbert Pocket اللي هو كان اتخانق معاه في الأول خالص فهو أعز أصدقاء. He told him about his love for Estella. What did Mrs. Jagger promise Pip to do? He promised him to dismiss Orlick. الحقيقة Pip was not happy with Orlick and when he spoke to Mr. Jagger he promised him to dismiss Orlick. Where would Estella stay in London and why? Estella came to London and she stayed in Richmond with a lady who would be paid to introduce her to important people in London. This lady, Estella, will be staying with her so that she would introduce her. يعني introduce تعرفها على الناس المهمة اللي في London. What did Estella give Pip? What did she give him? When she met him and they talked, she gave him a purse of money, كيس مليان فلوس, and told him to spend it while they were together in London. What was Estella's opinion about Mr. Matthew Pocket? كان رأي استيلا ايه؟ احنا عارفين انه بيب ده بيتأثر بكل حاجة استيلا بتعملها. بتذله وبيحبها. من الحب. She said that he was a good member of Miss Havisham's relatives. أخيرا رضيت عن حد. الوحيد اللي رضيت عنه استيلا. What did Estella tell Pip after they arrived in Richmond? What did she tell him? قالت له حاجة فرحته قوي. She told him that Miss Havisham wanted her to keep in contact together. إنه Miss Havisham طلبت إنه بيب وإستيلا يفضلوا أصدقاء أو يبقوا مع بعض. يا ترى كانت عايزاهم يتجوزوا ولا لأ؟ هل هي ابتدت تبقى fond of بيب؟ يا ترى البنت اللي ربتها دي هتشوفه ازاي هتكسر قلبها داين تو داين. كل حاجة بتعملها في الدنيا بترجع لك تاني. هي علمتها تكره وما تحبش خالص. She taught her to hate and not to love. هيتقلب على Miss Havisham herself. Estella herself will turn against Miss Havisham and will break the lady's heart. بعد كده هتشوفوا. Why was Pip happy when he met Estella? Because it was her first time to call him up. كانت أول مرة استيلا هي اللي تطلبه. هو المحب الولهان، أول مرة هي اللي طلبته. فاكرين أول مرة حصل حاجة تانية برضو؟ إما كانوا لسه بيقعدوا في بيت مس هافيشام وبيلعبوا cards together for the first time بعد 6 شهور. كان بدأ بيب يبقى شاطر شوية، يجيله ثقة في نفسه في لعب الكوتشينة. She gave him his first kiss on the cheek and he never forgot it. الحب من أول لحظة هو اللي حصل بين بيب وإستيلا. What did Herbert advise Pip? الحقيقة هربرت كان بيحب بيب قوي. He liked him a lot. He was his best friend. And he did not like Estella. So he told him, please, don't think about Estella. Try to forget her. Get her out of your mind. Forget about Estella. دي كانت بعض الأسئلة بتاعت chapter 7. هندخل شوية كده مع بعض في some critical questions كمان. مستعدين؟ جاهزين؟ وما تنسوش زي ما بقول لكم دايما اقعدوا اتفرجوا على الفيديوهات دي. التكرار بيعلم ايه؟ قولوا معايا الشطار. Do you think that Miss Havisham's relatives were jealous of Estella? Why and why not? ليه تفتكروا انه قرايب مس هافيشام ممكن يكونوا غيرانين من استيلا؟ Because Miss Havisham was rich وكانت ممكن تتبنى أي حد من القرايب. She chose to adopt مين؟ استيلا. Because she chose to adopt يعني ايه؟ والله هزعل. يعني ايه؟ تتبنى. هي تبنت استيلا. Love is blind. الحب أعمى. Discuss. طبعا أظن بطل الحب أعمى على طول كده هيتحط مستر بيب على طول. بيب loved Estella even though he knew she would never make him happy. هتفضل حتى لو علاقتهم استمرت هتذله دايما. هي ست الهانم وهو الراجل الغلبان. هتفضل طول عمرها بتذله. Pip thought that Miss Havisham wasn't safe. Discuss. لما شاف أورليك كجيت كيبر خاف على مس هافيشام. بيب was very kind deep inside. ما تنسوش انه اللي مربيه وجو is a very kind man وخلى الطيبة دي تدخل جوه قلبه. فيعني بالرغم انه مس هافيشام was never really nice to him, he felt for her. he was afraid that Orlick might harm her. If you were Joe, would you get upset with Pip? حط نفسك كده مكان جوز أخته. هل كنت هتزعل من بيب؟ أنا أعتقد لو مش هيزعل أقل ما فيها إيه؟ هيتجرح. If he will not be angry, he will be hurt. Yes, he was upset. Of course. ليه؟ He didn't visit him. جه وراح قاعد في اوتيل وما جاش يزوره. يعني أنا لو كنت مكان جو أنا كنت هقطع معاه العمر كله. هتجرح منه ومش هكون عايز أكلمه بقى. Pip sent a present for Joe. What does it reflect about him? بعت له هدية. What does it reflect? إنه زي ما لسه بقول إنه بيب جواه طيب. الدنيا غيرته غرته وكان حاسس بتأنيب ضمير. He felt guilty towards his brother-in-law. ممكن نقول brother-in-law ممكن نقول إيه؟ husband of his sister. Either his brother-in-law or husband of his sister. الاثنين فيهم نفس المعنى. Mr. Matthew Pocket proved to be an honest person. Discuss. ماثيو بوكيت أثبت إنه راجل فعلاً honest يعني صريح وكويس في كل شيء. He advised Miss Havisham not to trust her fiancé so much. He also cared for Pip and taught him so much how to become a gentleman. من الأول خالص ماثيو بوكيت كان راح قال لمس هافيشام I don't trust your fiancé. أنا مش بثق خطيبك. وطبعا كلنا عارفين هو وابنه اللي احتضنوا بيب وعلموه. I tell you what real love is. It is giving your heart to someone completely, just as I did. Do you agree with Miss Havisham's opinion? Why or why not? رأيكم ايه؟ هل هي صحيح ما بتقول الحب الحقيقي هو ان تدي قلبك بالكامل لشخص بتحبه؟ طبعا كل واحد هيفكر بطريقة هنا، لكن هنا في حالة Miss Havisham she was not right. She was not right because her own heart was broken. لأن قلبها نفسه اتكسر. اللي حبته سابها واقفة في فستان الفرح والتورتة اللي احنا شفناها ومليانة كوبويبس وهرب، وهيطلع انه كان متجوز قبل كده وكان بس عايز ياخد فلوسها. So with this my dear friends I will leave you. نرجع تاني نكمل مع بعض. Study hard and enjoy yourselves.